So the people of Israel had faced one of the worst moments in their history. And, I know it's a little bit like a broken record, but I really do like setting this context because, context is king, of course. But it helps us kind of like be able to figure out what's happening. Well, you might remember Jerusalem was conquered, the temple was destroyed, the people of Israel had been taken away as captives to Babylon. That all happened. Hey, if we're going to say the year the temple was destroyed, what year would we say that was? That we had just a few years that we wanted to remember. The year the temple was destroyed, and you get it within one, I'll accept two different answers. Anyone here remember? Is that a hand? 586. We would also have accepted 587. But 586 is the one that I would, that's the one. Did you guys have it? Mia, did you have it there? She had it? You just throw your hand up. Just let me know. 586. But now we're much later. And the Persians are in charge, and they allow the various peoples to go back to their homelands, and they allow these people to go back and build their temples, to rebuild the temples to their gods. And over 400,000 Jews go back home, and they build an altar and offer sacrifices and lay the foundations of the temple. But you might remember that the enemies of the Jews, they kind of come in and they make trouble. These were people who worshiped the Lord and their gods. So they want to help build the temple. But what I made a recommendation as to what was really going on with these guys. Anyone want to remind the people, what was the recommendation that I made, the suspicion that I have of what was really going on with these guys? Were they really concerned about the worship of the Lord, or is it something else? And if that's something else, what was that something else? Anyone? Just by means of quick review. I used the word influence. Now again, the scripture didn't really lay that out. But I'm suggesting that these guys really just wanted the power and the influence. And that was, to me, kind of seen clearly, because when the Jews didn't want their help, and they didn't want their help because these guys were compromisers, and we talked about biblical separation in that context and stuff. When the Jews didn't want their help, what did these guys do? Who cared about the rebuilding of the temple so much they wanted to help? What did they do when they weren't allowed to help? That was a good one. Shut down the government. For those listening at home, good answer. I like the way you think. Anyway, what did they do? What's that? Jill, what was that? She's like, not me. They really stopped the work, right? They stopped the work. For 17 years, they made trouble and they stopped the work. And for a time they were successful and the work on the temple stopped until two prophets entered the scene and tell the people of Israel that they need to rebuild the temple. Now, this is a little harder to remember, but can anyone tell me one of the two prophets who preached that motivated the people to rebuild the temple? It's either this or I just lecture. Anyone want to get me one of the two prophets? Nehemiah. That's a good answer for a different question, but that's the wall. That's right. That's the wall. Isaiah's a little earlier. Not a terrible guess because Isaiah is one of the major prophets. But these are actually minor prophets. Is that a hand? Go ahead. Did you say Haggai? Haggai. I think I heard Haggai. Haggai. It's H-A-G-G. Is it I-A-I or just A-I? It's Haggai. Although everyone pronounces it Haggai. I've never heard anyone pronounce it Haggai. Almost anyone. Everyone says Haggai. But Haggai, yeah, Haggai's one of the guys. Go ahead. Yeah, Haggai and Zechariah. These two guys, and we're going to go through Haggai. We're going to look at Haggai after tonight. We're dealing with Ezra. The book of Ezra is like two halves. So the first 6 chapters, it's like the first half, and then the last chapters are like we move forward in time a bit. But after we're done with that, we'll look at Haggai. Well, anyway, after 17 years of doing nothing, the people start building. But then, even then, Satan tries to disrupt the work. And there's an official, now I'm not going to ask his name, unless you have his name. Anyone? I mean, I wouldn't expect anyone to remember this guy's name. This Persian official, his name is Tattenai. Tattenai, I wouldn't expect anyone to. The guy is kind of a vapor. He's kind of a shadow. He shows up, he's gone. You never think about him again. You never hear about him again. It's not a name that you would remember. But this guy shows up, and he wants the king, who at this time is Darius. I think I have, so Darius begins his rule around 520. So he wants the king, Darius, to know what's going on. He wants Darius to go check the record books. He writes a letter, and he wants the king to go check the record books and see if these Jews are telling the truth. See if these Jews really got permission, because that's what they're claiming. They're claiming that they got permission from Cyrus to rebuild the temple. And he's like, why don't you check the records, Darius? These Jews are building a temple. You should know about this. Go check the records and see if the Jews are telling the truth. And that's where we left off. That's what we looked at, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So if you didn't have all the stuff fresh in your head, that's fine. I understand. But Darius, the king of Persia, he has people search for Cyrus' decree. He wanted to make sure that the Jews had, in fact, received permission to rebuild. Then King Darius issued a decree, and search was made in the archives where the treasures were stored in Babylon. So now you might say, hey, look, why is Darius searching for the decree that was made almost 20 years earlier by Cyrus? Like, wouldn't he know? Shouldn't King Darius know that King Cyrus made a decree that all the peoples would return to their homelands and rebuild their temples? What would you think? Would you think they would know that? I would think he would know that. This is my answer. Obviously he doesn't. Okay, obviously he doesn't, because he goes on a search. But this is how I liken it. This is what I liken it to. In 2012, I become the pastor of this church. And if you would have told me in 2012 that Pastor Thornton created a policy in 1992, a lesser-known policy in 1992, I would have been like, oh, okay. What would I know about 1992? I wasn't even saved in 1992. You know how old I was in 1992? I was, what's 1978? I would have been like 14 or so. I've been like 14. Paul, you would have been like 14, 15. Joe, you would have been a couple years younger than that. And Matt and Andrew, a couple years younger than that. Oh no, you're my age.
Yeah, I mean, I'm younger than you, but
not that much younger.
only
A couple months. You're a baby, Everybody's age is it's comparable to, what's the word? It's relative to my age. So if you're older than me, you're old. If you're younger than me, you're young. Because we're all narcissists. But anyway, so if you tell me in 1992, and that actually happened. So I caught wind somewhere, or I was in the archives somewhere. I was in the not the archives. What do we call them? The minutes, the church minutes. And I saw like this policy that the pastor and deacons made in the minutes like 15 years earlier that I never heard of, that I never got to take advantage of. And I'm like, oh, look, that's right there in the minutes. That would have been nice if they would have followed out what the policy that they made there. Well, but I didn't know it. The church apparently didn't know it. And so here was a policy that the former pastor and deacons made. I want to say it was 10, 15, maybe longer, maybe earlier before that nobody knew about. I didn't know about. Well, why would we know about it? Nothing was really done about it. I think that maybe the pastor probably forgot about the policy. I mean, we could have made decisions in deacons meetings 10 years ago. I don't know. If we don't start practicing them right away, we probably forget what they are. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So maybe it's something like that happened here. Darius is a new king, And he seems to be unaware of Cyrus's decree, or at least the part of Cyrus' decree that allows the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And so he searches in Babylon. And he doesn't find it in Babylon. And so he expands his search to other capital cities. King Darius issued a decree, and search was made in the archives where the treasures were stored in Babylon. In Ecbatana, in the fortress, which is in the province of Media, a scroll was found, and there was written in it as follows. Memorandum. We'll stop there for a second. So in Ecbatana, that's where they actually find this scroll. And if we look at a map, we'll get a feel for where Ecbatana is. I don't like that map. We'll go with here. Israel. Okay? Israel is centrally located in this map I'm showing. Off to the west is the Mediterranean Sea. Off to the southeast is the Arabian Desert. If you continue to go east, you're going to see what we would know as Kuwait. Modern Kuwait would be right here on the edge of the Persian Gulf. You might remember the, what was that called? Operation Desert Storm, when Daddy Bush came in and took out Saddam. And actually, it didn't take out Saddam until much later. That was W. W took out Saddam Hussein. But Iraq, I'm just going to kind of, something like that. Well, you'll see Babylon right in the middle of this map. I've moved the map over towards the east more, towards the Persian Gulf. And to the northeast is Ecbatana. So on our map of the Babylonian Empire, Ecbatana is way off to the east. If you look at a map of Persia, which is here, we've expanded because the Persian Empire is a lot bigger. What the map we just looked at was basically this area. Now we've expanded out because, again, the Persian Empire is much bigger than the Babylonian Empire is. Well, right in the middle of the Persian Empire, I'm trying to zoom in here. It's not working. All right. Well, you're just going to have to trust me on this because I don't think you could see this. Why aren't you zooming in? All right. Right in the middle of the Persian Empire is Ecbatana. And that's really the capital city. So when Cyrus is the king of Persia, almost 20 years earlier, there were 3 capital cities. So you have Babylon, which is here, and that's where he would spend his winters. And he would spend spring in Susa. Maybe we'll go back to the other map. It's a little easier. None of my maps are. Okay, well, you could see it a little better here. Babylon is here, winter. He spent his springs in Susa, and here at Ecbatana is where he spent his summers. And so the royal decree of Cyrus could be found in any one of these cities. It's not found in Babylon. It is found in Ecbatana. And actually, we could find other biblical accounts that take place there. But this could have taken months to find. It could have taken months to find this thing, and all the while the Jews are continuing to build. And as we look at the passage, you'll notice the beginning of the decree is memorandum. It's a memo. It's a memo. Did you see the memo? We're putting cover sheets on all temple rebuild reports. Go ahead and make sure you get a copy of that memo. Something like that. They did memos back in the 6th century. Yes, that was an Office Space reference for those of you, just a few of you who might have noticed that. But late 90s, where it was an interesting time for movies. But let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and take a look at that memo in verses 3 through 5. In the first year of King Cyrus, Cyrus the king issued a decree Concerning the house of God at Jerusalem, let the temple, the place where sacrifices are offered, let the temple be rebuilt, and let its foundations be retained, its height being 60 cubits and its width 60 cubits, with 3 layers of huge stones and 1 layer of timbers, and let the cost be paid from the royal treasury. Also let the gold and silver utensils of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem, these utensils that he took, let the gold and silver utensils be brought to, that he took and brought to Babylon, be returned and brought to their places in the temple in Jerusalem, and you shall put them in the house of God. So Cyrus makes a decree that the peoples would return to their homeland, but he specifically mentions the temple at Jerusalem. Almost 20 years earlier, King Cyrus specifically mentioned the temple at Jerusalem. He orders the size of it, 60 cubits would be its height and 60 cubits its width. He even says, and what stands out to me, what probably stood out to you as well, is that the cost of it would be paid from the royal treasury. In other words, the king's tax money is going to pay for the temple. So the Jews don't even have to pay for the temple. The king's going to pay for it. Cyrus agrees to pay for it through the tax money. Now, nobody would have known about this. Nobody would have known about this if Tattenai, the Persian official, who didn't seem to like that they were rebuilding the temple, and seems to, he wrote a letter to what seems to be in some opposition to it. If Tattenai doesn't come against the Jews and write a letter trying to get the work stopped, or at least double check to see if the work should be happening, nobody would have known about this. But Tattenai's work to disrupt the temple actually turns out to uncover the decree and pay for the temple. So Tattenai is trying to stop the temple from being built, seemingly. Instead, his work ends up financing. His work ends up resulting in the financing of the building of the temple. And so I found that kind of interesting. And I think about that. I sometimes think the work of Satan, God will work in spite of it. Even this whole thing with Charlie Kirk. Now listen, Charlie Kirk is not necessarily, just so you know, he was ecumenical. He was an ecumenical. We're not ecumenical by no means. We believe in separating from apostasy and from false doctrine and all that stuff. He was ecumenical. We're not. But it was clearly the work of Satan to murder this guy. And God used it. God used it. God's using it even now. God's bringing people to him even now. Even in our church, we've seen that now. So sometimes Satan works, and God uses even what Satan did to bring about his work, bring about good for him, for his glory. Well, anyway, Darius finds this decree, and he sends a letter to Tattenai in verses 6 and 7. And he tells this governor not to interfere with the temple project. Now, therefore, Tattenai, governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-Bozenai and your colleagues, the officials of the provinces beyond the river, keep away from there. Stay away. Stay away from Jerusalem. Leave this work on the house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild this house of God on its site. He's like, listen, it's not your business. Get out of there. Don't mess with Texas. Right? Is that what another W. Bush? Don't mess with Jerusalem. Don't mess with the temple. He wants the temple. He has the same policy. He adopts the same policy that Cyrus had adopted to let these people rebuild their temples so that their gods, because that's the way these Persians see it, so that their gods could pray to the Persian gods on behalf of the kings. It doesn't mean they're saved people. But Darius says, this temple's going to be rebuilt, and you're going to not interfere. But not only that, look at verse 8. Moreover, I issue a decree. This is the king. This comes from King Darius. This is the king of Persia. Moreover, I issue a decree concerning what you are to do for these elders of Judah in the rebuilding of this house of God. So not only don't interfere, like that is, don't try to stop the work, but the full cost The full cost is to be paid to these people from the royal treasury out of the taxes of the province beyond the river. And that without delay. You're going to take the tax money because you're over the provinces beyond the river. You're going to take the tax money and you're going to pay for the temple. And you're going to do it now without delay. Now, I'll bet Tatanai loves hearing that. You know what it reminds me of? A guy who may have had, and it's maybe not as clear because we don't know how ill his intentions are, but we sure are assuming a certain level of ill intent that Tatanai has. He is interfering with a temple rebuild, and in the end, he's told to go and pay for it. Does that remind you of any other biblical character who wanted to bring someone down, and then the king stepped in and exalted that person instead? Haman, when he wanted to bring down Mordecai, right? So Haman is like, yeah, let's go. I'm going to build the gallows. We're going to build them huge. They're going to be huge. He was like, and we're going to bring down Mordecai. We're going to hang Mordecai on those gallows. And he ended up getting hanged on the gallows. Tatanai ends up having to pay for the temple. Darius also wants to provide for the Jewish worship needs in verses 9 and 10, whatever is needed, both young bulls, rams, and lambs for a burnt offering to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and anointing oil, as the priests in Jerusalem request it, it is to be given to them daily without fail, that they may offer acceptable sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. In other words, we're going to give you a head start. Whatever they need, anything they need, the royal treasury, the tax money is going to pay for it. We're going to pay to give them the head start. And all we want in return, all the king wants in return, is for the Jews to pray for the king and for his sons. Remember, they seek the favor of all types of different gods. Remember what Cyrus wrote in the Cyrus Cylinder. May all the gods whom I have resettled in their sacred cities ask daily Bel and Nebo for a long life. For me, they wanted the Jews to pray for the Lord, and they thought that the Lord would pray to Bel and Nebo, their false gods, and that those false gods would give them life. It doesn't mean these guys are Christians. In fact, it shows quite clearly that they're not. But anyone who would interfere with this temple, look what would happen to him. And I issued a decree that any man who violates this edict, a timber shall be drawn from his house, shall be pulled from his house, and he shall be impaled on it. You know, that's like take the body and stick it through the timber, right? Something like that. He shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a dung heap, a refuse heap, a garbage heap on account of this. If you mess with the temple, we're going to take your body, we're going to skewer it on a beam from your house, and then we're going to make your house a garbage heap. And by the way, this is no empty threat because Darius actually impaled 3,000 Babylonians. When there was like a little bit of a rebellion, he was forced to retake the city of Babylon. This guy, you don't listen to this decree. We're going to make you a shish kebab. You ever have a shish kebab? Anyone here ever have a shish kebab? Oh man, remember the ones at Yankee Stadium, Paul? Remember the guy across the street who used to put that? It was he had hot sauce he put on it too. Oh, they were so good. He's gone. He's been gone for a long, long time. But they were every time I go to Yankee Stadium, I go over there and get some shish kebabs. But that was it's probably been 15. Oh, you like bacon on a stick? Okay, all right. You'll have to make me some. I'd like to try that. Yeah. So anyway, bacon wrapped scallops or something. That sounds good too. But we'll impale you. And Darius is serious about this because he wants the favor of the gods, including the God of Jerusalem. May the God who has caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who attempts to change this, who attempts to change the decree, so as to destroy this house of God in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have issued this decree. Let it be carried out with all diligence. So the king's basically, this is the complete opposite of what Tatanai was trying to accomplish. Now try to imagine being a Jew. Try to imagine that you're rebuilding the temple, and a government official comes in, and he's like, okay, I want to know what your names are, and I'm going to report you to the king. And you know, because of the preaching of Haggai and because of the preaching of Zechariah, you know that this is what God wants. But in the back of your mind, you're like, oh man, Satan is coming after us. Satan is trying to stop this work. Try to imagine that what you're perceiving as the work of Satan turns out to be the very avenue through which God pays for this temple and makes it happen. God used all of it to help ensure that the temple is finished. He used their money, and any interference would be met with death. It's a complete reversal of what Tattenai was trying to accomplish. And so the temple is finally built and completed. Then Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-Bozenai, and their colleagues carried out the decree with all diligence, just as King Darius had sent. Now, if you were Tattenai, would you follow what the king said? I would. Why? I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want my body impaled on a beam. All right? I don't want them to carve out a point on a beam in my house and stick my body through it. I'm not interested in that. Sorry. I'm not interested in being murdered and killed, put to death by the king. So they do exactly what the king says. In verse 14, and the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they finished building according to the command of the God of Israel and the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So these Persian officials, they have no choice. Fear is a great motivator. Fear of death is a great motivator. And fear of having their homes destroyed and their families destroyed. And that reminds me of a joke that Ronald Reagan told. Now, who here likes Ronald Reagan? Any Reagan fans? He was fantastic. Reagan was fantastic. I mean, he was really one of the best presidents. In my lifetime, really one of the very best. And he told this joke. Kids, you have to understand who Gorbachev is. Gorbachev, so there's the United States and there's the Soviet Union. That's modern-day Russia. The Soviet Union, they were communists, kind of like what the Democrats want to do. They want to make us communists. So you had the United States, it was a free market society, and you had the Soviet Union, and they were communists, and they were being led by Gorbachev, okay? And Reagan was the president of the United States. So he says this, Reagan and Gorbachev were in a limo along with an American official and a Soviet official. Gorbachev turns to the American official and tells him to jump off a nearby waterfall. The American official refused, saying, "Sir, I have a wife and 2 kids at home. I'm not going to jump off that waterfall." Gorbachev then turns to the Soviet official and tells him to jump off the nearby waterfall. He quickly complies. The American official, shocked and appalled, he swiftly runs to the bottom of the waterfall to find the Soviet official who had survived the fall and made it to the shore. The American official asked the Soviet official why he listened to Gorbachev and why he jumped off the waterfall. And the Soviet official said, "Sir, I have a wife and 2 kids at home." Fear was the motive. If I don't listen to Gorbachev, my wife, my whole family's going to pay the price. I'll be killed and my family will be killed. And that's kind of like what's going on here a little bit. By the way, that's what life under socialism is like. The socialists, they have this false view of equality, that we're all gonna have exactly the same, and it's gonna be a utopian society, and it's gonna be communal and all that stuff. In reality, they end up with nothing, and a few people end up with everything. And they control the people, and the economy goes to shambles, and they will, as they have done, outlaw the preaching of the gospel. That's where communism leads. That's where guys like, what's his name, Mamdani, I want to call him Madmani because he's mad. He's a madman, Madmani, but I think it's Mamdani. That's the guy who's hopefully doesn't win mayor of New York, but it looks like he might at the moment. That's what people like AOC believe. You know, these people they're just whack jobs in their thinking. They have no clue. They can't look at what's happened in this world and say, oh, look where this leads. They don't seem to get it. And then they proudly call themselves democratic socialists. They're telling you what they are. They're even putting the word socialist in. We're democratic socialists. You know, in the 80s, they would be like considered spies. They'd probably be thrown in jail. Today, they're governing. That's where we're going. But anyway, fear can be a great motivator. That's my point. And the Persian officials comply with the king's edict because they don't want their houses destroyed. They don't want their families destroyed, and they don't want to be skewered on a beam from their house. But the Jews are motivated not by fear. What were the Jews motivated by? The Persian officials are motivated by fear. The Jews are motivated by what? Preaching of the Word of God. They're motivated by what God is actually saying. They put their trust in the Lord and in His Word. And that should be our primary motivation. What does God want? What does God say? And the temple is completed. This temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month Adar. It was the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So we're talking about the beginning of Darius' rule is 520. The temple takes about 4 years or so to complete. In March of 515, if you care to remember that, you don't have to. In March of 515, the temple is completed, 70 years after it was destroyed. And so we see the decree of Cyrus. We see another decree by Darius. We also get mention at some point of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who was under his rule. There was a rebuilding of the temple, the city walls, which we'll see in the book of Nehemiah. Each one of these kings contributes to the restoration of the city of Jerusalem. And the people of Jerusalem dedicate the temple in verses 16 and 17, and the sons, we'll kind of fly through the rest of this. And the sons of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. They offered for the dedication of this temple of God 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, corresponding to the number of the tribes of Israel. So we have this dedication of the temple. We have the setting up of the revolving priesthood. Then they appointed the priests to their divisions and the Levites in their orders for the service of God in Jerusalem, as written in the book of Moses. And so what would happen is priests would serve 1 week at a time. They would serve 2 weeks a year. So they would come from wherever they lived. They'd serve a week, they'd go home, and then the rotation would come up a second time a year, and they would do that. So that's kind of how the system worked. You could read about that in the law of Moses. And you could actually read about that in John the Baptist's father, Zechariah, was a priest who was on the rotation. They celebrate the Passover in verses 19 through 22. The exiles observed the Passover on the 14th of the first month. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were pure. Then they slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, both for their brothers, the priests, and for themselves. The sons of Israel who returned from exile and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land to join them to seek the Lord God of Israel ate the Passover. And they observed the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, for the Lord had caused them to rejoice and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them to encourage them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. Once again, we see, just a quick note, you see the king of Assyria. And you say, the liberals will say, the Assyrians are gone a long time ago. The Syrians haven't been around since like the 680s, so I don't know what's really going on. I mean, maybe the 630. It's been a while. But remember, King Darius is over Assyria. He's over Babylon. He's over the land of the Medes and Persians. So don't let the liberals trip you up with that, okay? For them to call him the king of Assyria is by no means some strange thing. There's no problem here. The Assyrian king had long ago caused problems for Israel, and now the king who is ruling over the land of Assyria is helping rebuild the temple. And the first part of Ezra is complete, And everybody, it's a happy ending. It's a happy ending. The temple, for the first 6 chapters, we've seen this goal of wanting to rebuild the temple, and now it's built. And it's almost like the end of a book, because another issue comes up later on. We're moving forward next week. But what we've seen so far in Ezra, the first part of Ezra, is look how God keeps his promises. The Jews start building the temple. They're discouraged. 17 years later, 2 prophets encourage them to finish the temple. A guy steps in and seemingly tries to stop it. At least writes a letter telling the king what's going on. God uses that letter, which seems to be, based on the theme we read throughout Ezra, which seems to be a letter of opposition. God uses that opposition to help finish the temple and pay for it. God takes the plans of Satan and completely turns them upside down. God keeps his promises. And he'll eventually keep his promise to the people of Israel, to the house of Israel, and to the house of Judah, to send a Messiah, which happened when Jesus came. And that Messiah would die on a cross to pay the penalty for the sins of the world. And he'll eventually keep his promise to save anyone. He would eventually keep his promise to save anyone who would place their faith in the Messiah. And he'll eventually keep his promise that he will come back and he will rule. His son will come back and rule for 1,000 years and for all eternity. We're going to take our hymnals and turn to hymn 85.